Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you joining from various parts of the world for this third UNRMS workshop organized by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe from Geneva. I, along with Teresa, Charlotte, and several distinguished speakers, welcome you all to this workshop. Before we will give 1 minute for people who are just joining in to make sure that everyone is on before we start. Please give 1 more minute. All right, we will start with a few housekeeping remarks. This workshop is being recorded. The recording will be uploaded in the meeting website later. Please mute your microphone if you are able to enable it. Most of the attendees are muted by default, but that doesn't mean that we can't have an interaction. Please use the chat function for comments and questions. During the Q&A session, if you want to speak out, we may, and if you have time, we will allow you to raise your hand and then we will take you onto the speaker panel to ask the question. So with that, let us start the workshop. So we have the program as shown here, which is divided into 2 segments. We will have a welcome by Charlotte Griffiths, who is officer in charge of the Sustainable Energy Division, UNECE, and we will have few introductory remarks of the workshop by Teresa Ponce de Leo, who will talk about some basic background about UNRMS, and then followed by 6 presentations. And in the second part of the program, we will have a panel discussion, which is focusing on resources as a service and critical raw materials management. And we will have few case study focused inputs from few distinguished panelists. And that is a program. And with that, I will now hand over to Charlotte to give the welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, Harry. Can you hear me?
Yes, very loud and clear.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished experts, speakers, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from Geneva here at the Palais des Nations. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all to this third UNRMS workshop. I think many of you knew Scott Foster, who was our director of the Sustainable Energy Division for many years. He retired at the end of May. So we're looking forward to our new director, Dario Liguti, starting with us on the 3rd of October. And in the interim, as Harry mentioned, I'm the acting director. So I guess I'd like to start with the words, we live in uncertain times, and I think we'd all agree with that. The Chinese use 2 brush strokes to write the word crisis. One brush stroke stands for danger, the other for opportunity. I'd like to quote John F. Kennedy, who said that in a crisis, be aware of the danger, but recognize the opportunity. And I'd like you all to consider that this workshop is really about the opportunities to look differently about that way we manage our natural resources. I think we're all aware that the world is facing the existential threat of climate change, and we're in the middle of the first true global energy crisis. As the price of energy, of fertilizers and food commodities skyrocket, people across the planet are unable to absorb those rising costs. So as a result, we're seeing an unprecedented contribution of rising energy prices to food insecurity and humanitarian needs. In recent months, I think we'll all recognise that we've seen severe heat waves in many countries. We've not seen those temperatures before, those high temperatures. We're seeing dramatic floods in others. And all these heat waves and droughts, they're all having and are taking a toll on our populations, but also on the production of agricultural products that should be on our supermarket shelves over the coming months. And with the heat waves, we're seeing droughts, rivers are disappearing, and water bodies are shrinking. Natural resources are at the centre of the renewed geopolitical challenges that we see today. The need to manage resources sustainably has never been more pressing. For the last few centuries, the world has worked under the doctrine that natural resources are limited, that there are not enough of those resources to go around, and hence they need to be seized in whatever manner possible. The focus has been on the raw materials themselves, but not what they are used for. I think we tend to overlook that raw materials are actually used to deliver a service, whether that's providing energy, creating homes, nutrition for plants, or ensuring quality water for consumption. And since the spotlight has been only on the raw material commodity, I think we've ended up with an inefficient model in every manner possible to manage those resources. Materials are used less and more is wasted. We need to change that. The United Nations Framework Classification for Resources, also known as UNFC, that I think you're all familiar with, has firmly embedded social, environmental, and economic sustainability principles, and it supports attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals that we're all familiar with. Helping countries deliver on the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda is at the heart of everything we do here in our work on resource classification and management. And I should add, the work that we do in the Sustainable Energy Division as a whole. We see that UNFC is now being used in the EU countries, in African Union, and in many other countries around the world. And I think the interest in our work on UNFC and UNRMS is demonstrated by the number of participants we see from around the world on this workshop today. I'm pleased to announce to you that Queensland, Australia, has recently legislated using UNFC for geothermal energy reporting. This legislation came into effect on the 1st of September, so just a few days ago. But classification and reporting are not enough. The world is facing existential challenges. We see the global population growing and resource use per capita is increasing. Tensions over access to resources are rising. I think we can all agree that attaining climate objectives and building sustainable growth require not only rethinking energy, but also rethinking how we manage raw materials. We need a structural change and a true paradigm shift for both. Let's ask the question, are natural resources really limited? Yes, if we produce and use resources in a manner that degrades and depletes the natural capital. However, there could be another way that the natural capital could be enriched with use, as with any other capital. We have the United Nations Resource Management System, or UNRMS. It steps us in this direction. So we need to ask the question, what decisions and actions are required to nurture the resource base so that it is enough, not only for the present generation, but also for the future generations that are going to inherit this planet? We're so deeply influenced by current commodity models that we have a worrying incapacity to see alternatives. UNRMS that examines the overlooked options. It provides a sustainable resource management system approach for all stakeholders, for governments, for industry, for investors, for civil society, and for academia. This is the third UNRMS workshop in this series, and we're highlighting the importance of critical raw materials and the concept of the resource as a service approach. I'm pleased to advise that we have an eminent lineup of experts that Harry showed you on the screen, who will be presenting those concepts that I mentioned. We'll also be showcasing a number of case studies that test those concepts, and the testing is very important. So before I close, I'd really like to very sincerely thank Teresa Ponce de Leo, who's the chair of the UNRMS subgroup that's been working on this. I'd like to thank the other members of Teresa's subgroup. And I'd also like to thank and extend sincere appreciation to Harry Torsidas, for all the efforts that have been dedicated to really developing the UNRMS over many months. And as I said, this is the third workshop today, and that demonstrates the progress that we're making on this important topic. I think all of you will have seen the very active chat. I'm very pleased to share that many participants are joining us today. We've had well over 400 experts register from all over the world. So with that, I'd very much like to welcome you all and wish you a very productive workshop. I look forward to listening to it. And thank you again to Teresa and the other members of the subgroup, and to all our speakers today, and to Harry. Thank you very much. Thank you, Harry.
Thank you, Charlotte, for that encouraging and motivating words. Many people who are attending this workshop has contributed to the initial concepts of UNRMS, contributed to the developing on the draft, which we have today. I have pasted a link to the latest draft of UNRMS in the chat. So any one of you who are new to UNRMS, please go and download that draft, which is not a huge document, about 20 pages, and I request all of you to read that. I will be posting further links of publications which will be of interest as we go along. Now I will invite Teresa Ponce de Leo, who is the president of the LENG Portugal, and also the chair of the UNRMS subgroup, which is developing and implementing and overseeing the case studies. Over to you, Teresa, for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Harry, for your words. Are you listening to me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So it's my pleasure to be here today with you. Good day to everyone. And because we have several dangers and we need to create from them opportunities, and we need to help decisions and actions, we have been working on this UNRMS. We now have moved to a different level as long as we advance in the clarification of the toolkit concepts. UNRMS will provide several tools to help attain sustainable resource management based on principles and requirements, which are already in a document for those who want to contribute. These tools will offer standardized methodologies and approaches to achieve the objectives, and the objectives are to be in line with Sustainable Development Goals. We wanted to, in the end, to provide clean energy indexes in alignment with Sustainable Development Goals, to work with resources as a service, with options, checklists, and guidelines that include aspects of comprehensive resource recovery, value addition, and circularity. And we already developed a document that is circulating with resources as a service. We wanted to deal with the resource supply systems with a schematic overview representing the complexity of the entire system. And for that, we need to use tools as artificial intelligence, blockchain, machine learning, and that's what we will see and analyze from the presentations, some of the presentations we'll have today. We also have critical raw materials that are proof that as we know the resources, they are not enough for the energy transition. And and there's a lot of work already done on this topic. So, Harry, are you sharing the presentation?
Yes, it is. We are on slide 8 now.
Because I'm not seeing it. Okay. So at this moment, with this workshop, we want to raise awareness of the UNRMS for all, mainly on critical raw materials and resources as a system, to see the possibilities to implement and how to move forward, and to and to create a better version of UNRMS. I will. So we want. I will move forward. I'm not seeing the presentation, Harry. Sorry.
But, you are able to see it now? You know. We are in. I will move to slide 9.
Okay, you can move. This working group, as Charlotte already said, depends on the expert group on resource management and works actively with the TAG and the several other working groups related to resources and to the international centers of excellence on resource management. So we are a very active and team of work. You can move, please. So as I told, the principals want to deliver to the Sustainable Development goals based on requirements and on specific tools that are being built. You can move on. The steps are here identified. The need to respond to the principles, the need to formulate the conceptual solution tool, the need to test the tools developed in order to be so that they are reliable for the decision help system we want to offer to all the stakeholders, governments, industry, universities, finance system. We have a very active revision process of our developments by the subgroup TAG and working groups on resource management. And we want to release the formal tool at the expert group on resource management's annual meeting. You can move, please.
Yeah. Slide
so we already had the 3 workshops. This is the 3rd one, and public consultations on the draft document from September to November 22, where you are all invited to participate and collaborate. So these are the deliverables and timelines we have proposed for ourselves. I will not list them all, but they are here as an indicator for those who want to participate. Please move. This is the last one. So we already have some documents that are published in UNECE website and can be that may be consulted. This is last one.
Yeah.
So today, with not losing more time, I move the floor to our panelists. I really ask them to use 5 to 7 minutes because we have a very tight schedule. So I move immediately the floor to sorry, I need
Francis Wall.
So Francis Wall from Exeter University, UK, and member of the UNRMS. Francis, the floor is yours. And please stick to the 5 to 7 minutes.
I've started my stopwatch, Teresa. Thank you very much. And I think, Harry, am I sharing my slides successfully?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we can share.
Okay. Well, greetings to everybody in whatever time zone you are. I'm rather humbled by being given this title from Harry about UNRMS simplified, and I hope I make some kind of reasonable attempt at doing that for you in this presentation. So thank you very much for the invitation. So I'm going to give the talk, and straight away on this slide, I'd like to acknowledge 3 colleagues, and you'll see their materials as I go through these slides. So Eva Marquis, Tom Bide, and Stefan Horn. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you a short story from one of our case studies, which I hope will help people who are new to UNRMS to get a better idea of what we're up to in trying to use this system and what it's about and how it can help. So my story comes from the southwest of Great Britain and or the UK, right in southwest England. You can see on the right-hand side of that slide, that tiny red area is the area of Cornwall in the UK. And there on the map, you can see it's only about 150 kilometres long and at the widest part, about 50 kilometres wide. And yet at the moment in that area, we have some world-class kaolin mines that have been working for a long time. We have 11 new exploration projects for some critical raw materials, lithium, tin, tungsten, and also maybe copper even. We have geothermal energy, deep and shallow in development. We have a huge deployment happening very soon of offshore wind, so other kinds of renewable energy to think about. And then we're all in an area of very famous old mining, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site for the mining landscape. We have a very beautiful natural environment. Please come and visit when you have the opportunity here. And despite all that, there are many people in Cornwall who need better, stronger and well-paid jobs. So it isn't all beautiful beaches and holidays. There's many people here that have a lower than average standard of living. So this is an amazing opportunity to get it right while we're developing these new projects. And this is why we're looking for how do we do that? What's the framework? And I was quite a newcomer to the United Nations Resource Management System, and it seems to me completely ideal for helping to get it right. But then the reason why I was asked to give this talk is the next thing that we said and said back to the group, well, okay, but our people in regional development in our local government, they're not resources experts at all, they're regional development economic experts. How can we present this really well and quickly so that they get it fast? And so the one thing that we didn't do was give them the link like Harry did to all of us today to go and read the document. So I commend you to read the document, but that's quite a long read, even though it's only 20 pages. Right, so here on this slide, the UN framework classification is the original work that was done. That's really useful. We've done that in Cornwall, applying the UNFC to the projects, and so we can compare their stage of development. So that came first, and then on top of that is this amazing system of the UNRMS, which looks in the round at all the things you need to have sustainable development through the development of natural resources. But how do you present that to people then? Well, we weren't the only people in Cornwall here who were saying that we need some extra simplification and some presentation. It's really about presentation of the system. So our colleagues at the British Geological Survey here, when they wrote a report for the UK government, Stefan Horn at the BGS, he found these pretty little logos, and to the 12 principles in the UNRMS, he gave a nice logo so you can present it in one slide. So here we are, 12 logos. So now I'm going to show that in Cornwall, we wanted to simplify that even more. So we used the RMS like an a la carte menu. Okay, so we took this one, state rights and responsibilities, and thought, what do we really need to do in this area? What's most important? And we wrapped up 4 of them in circular economy thinking, because that's the research project that we're doing in Cornwall, and all of these we could fit in there. And then health and safety for us in the UK is not our biggest problem. It's very important, but I wrapped that up in the social contract. And that gave us this framework, which is being used. So this is a slide from my colleague Eva Marquis, who's now working part-time with our regional authority, the Cornwall Council, to use the UNRMS as our framework for our blueprint for sustainable development around technology metals. And so how does this work? So this is the first principle here, rights and responsibilities. And this is where you sit and work together with your regional authority and think, what are the most important things for us? And then we have these key principles here, which are now 4 things sitting on this line: the responsibility to the planet, or the environmental things, the responsibility to the people, including health and safety, all your social things, all the governance, the UNFC, and the integrated management of resources. And then the new economy, our circular economy, which picks up all the things like service orientation we'll hear about today, value added, resource recovery, and putting everybody together in a circular economy. And by doing that, we pick up the magic ESG that so many companies are thinking about and investors are thinking about, our environmental, social, and governance. And that immediately will speak to local companies. And then we have the other actions here, which are facilitating actions. Innovation, that's really important in our area. Transparency, so you're telling people what you're doing and everybody can see the revenues and so on that are happening. Competency and capability in education, really important. And then we added one extra one, being very cheeky, here we go, collaboration, that we thought was really important too. And so we have a kind of top-down approach here, from the thinking about what you're going to do and work out what are the most important parts from your menu of 12 principles and the description and all the information in those. And then your bottom up, if you like, we'll do here the investment into those facilitating actions. And this will be done, with us in the university, but with all the ecosystem of companies in Cornwall. And watch this space to see how well we've simplified that, Teresa, and can act in our area. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you, Francis. So without further ado, I pass the floor to Sigurd Heiberg, from Chair of Commercial Working Group and Expert Group on Resource Management. Sigurd, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me and see the slide?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Good.
Perfectly. So
5
to 7 minutes, please.
Sorry, I see that there's a little hitch here. There we are. Start with the first slide is better than starting with the last one. So thank you for inviting me on to talk about progressing from UNFC to UNRMS. I've been told that that resource quantities, budgets, and rain dances all have one thing in common: they don't affect the weather. And when we look through what we need to do with the UNRMS, of course, it's about informing the decisions that are required to reach the goals. And if we take a look at how they can be structured, you see them here. It is about setting the frameworks that Francis alluded to. It's about providing skills and capacity. We call that capability. Industry is providing that. And it's about allocating capital. The frameworks, you know them, the UN, Charlotte mentioned them. It's the 1.5 degrees, it's the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN side. From governments, the decisions will be the legal, regulatory, fiscal, contractual frameworks. It's about scheduling activities. It's about constructing infrastructures. It's about education, research, and many other things that facilitate the industry's efforts in providing its best capabilities in manners that the capital market can finance to reach the goals that we are striving for. So let's have a look then at the matrices that these decisions require, and there isn't time to develop that in this this talk, but I'll be very sort of cut in cardboard, and we have here at the base, and what is carrying the resource management logic are, of course, the projects. That is what we are doing. If you look to the financial reporting side, they call this scope 1 emissions, but I'll say projects are scope 1. Supply chains are scope 2, and product chains and services are scope 3. The project metrics, of course, is not just sources and products. It's certainly costs, it's certainly emissions, it's certainly employment, it's certainly cash flows. It's about stocks and flows, and it's not about just about having a life cycle optimum. It is, as we experience in Europe, it's about surviving the winter as well. So we need both the short view and the long view in resource management. Then these three, project, supply chains, and product chains, come together in linked resource management programs. And the entities will be looking at their asset portfolios. That is their share of the project, and they are not bound by geographies. And the jurisdictions will look at the complete project portfolio, that is the 100% of each project, and they will include projects from non-listed entities that are not reporting to the financial to the investors, and also artisanal mining and their own activities as governments. So those are the sort of bag of metrics that are required for resource management, and luckily the UNFC is designed to handle it. Now, you recognize this box. Of course, it's been shown many times. Take the E-axis and the F-axis and plot a matrix like this. Then the class is here shown in the matrix, and the numbers will be on the G-axis. So each square here will contain the numbers that are required for resource management. Then how do we handle this in day-to-day management? I would propose that you take a look at what I call the resource management matrix. You have this little square here that I showed on the previous slide. This stacks all the classes on top of one another on the vertical axis and lists them in the same order on the horizontal axis. At the opening balance, a project will have a class and a quantity. During the year, that quantity may change, there may be revisions, and the classification may change as well. And you plot this here, and then you aggregate the columns and you get the closing balance. This has the advantage that you see what the changes were, you see where they came from, and it's easy to see what's going on. But it need not be just from one time to another or 1 year to another. It can also be from one policy to another, and that becomes extremely interesting. What will a policy change do to the portfolio of projects? This method is, of course, a relative of the design structure matrix models that are used for large engineering projects. And the projects we are talking about are, in fact, large engineering projects. So there is similarities between the two, but the DSM, so to speak, is more about the individual components of the projects, that they come in the right sequence, that they're quality assured as they should be, that the organization is set up so that they can do it, and all the details that is required for successful project management. The other relative of this technique is the supply and use tables, or the input-output tables used for econometric analysis in national statistics. And that speaks to the resource management programs, so to speak. And I wouldn't advocate that we use a full supply and use table for a nation, but I would say that we should use it for the resource management programs that we're involved in. And what this would mean is that you have a resource management matrix for, say, the mine or the primary activities. You have another one for providing the energy to that, and another one for water and for infrastructure and so on. And you see how those projects are synchronized so that they come together in an efficient way without waste. So this is, here are the references. And with that, I would like to thank you for listening to how the UNRMS may help reach the resource management goals through the use of an expanded UNFC. And I acknowledge the EGRM Commercial Applications Working Group and the UNECE staff who has helped develop these concepts, and also Pay Blue staff for helping prepare the presentation. There's a lot more in this than I could cover in 7 minutes, but I hope it was helpful.
Yes. Thank you, Sigurd, for keeping the time and for raising the light on the design of structure matrix models to be applied to the resource management. So now I move the floor to Julian Hilton from Aleph Group UK and Chair of Sustainable Development Goals Delivery Working Group and the Experts Group on Resource Management. Julian, the floor is yours. Please keep 5 to 7 minutes. Thank you.
Can you hear and see me?
Yes, we can.
And is the screen showing?
Is not in show mode. Yeah. Okay, now it is.
Thank you very much, Therese. In starting this, I want to thank the people who are mentioned at the bottom of this first slide, the 3 young men who've been working with us now for up to nearly 3 years, Casper, Shaw and Kens, because from my perspective as a grandfather, this project, UNRMS, has to be understood as intergenerational and participative. And what I like very much, Francis, congratulate you on that, is that you showed how the participation works. And that has a direct connection to what I'll be focusing on quite a lot, which is resources as service and the idea of blockchain supporting that. So thank you very much to the team for that. And they are on the call, and if we have questions later, I'm sure they'll be happy to try to answer them. Back to the beginning, in 2017, October, we presented the idea of a resource management system to the World Resources Forum in Geneva. We did it very much as flying a kite. We weren't sure whether there would be the interest to do that and what the need would be. But the response was so positive, we said, OK, there is clearly a need in delivering the Sustainable Development Goals to do what the UN calls a bold and transformative move in the way in which resources are understood and managed. And that led to the idea of partnering the UNFC system with a resource management system. So what's its purpose? Its purpose, based on the fact that all sustainable development goals depend on natural resources for their delivery in one form or another, what would be a unique UN-based, UN-supported system that could show how resources would work in delivering the SDGs. So this is not an attempt to take over the idea of managing all global resources through the UN. Absolutely not. This is a way of responding to the challenge that 192 member states signed to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. And the goal has to be delivered within the next 8 years if the 2030 timeline is to be respected. So what is it that then was defined? Well, out of that, we put together a concept paper in 2018 called Step Change. We have to do something different. And that led to the UN itself running a series of collaborative and interactive roundtables in 2020 and 2021, brilliantly orchestrated by Scott, who was mentioned, Charlotte and Harry from Geneva. And that led to a very strongly and powerfully argued document called the Policy Brief, which was published in May of last year. And in that policy brief, we find all the different aspects, the mandates for an RMS, including a direct reference to it as recommendation 15, which puts UNFC and UNRMS together as the UN's preferred system for managing the resources to the service of Sustainable Development Goal delivery. And there are certain principles about what that then has to do. Tokenization is the first. All resources have to be identified and recognized as unique. In other words, it moves you away from the commodity market-driven model to one that is now very much based on the resources and the resources as services to the people, particularly following Brundtland, who need them most. Then the policy brief is very clear in its wish to focus on the extent to which the damage has been done by the lack of traceability and trackability of both materials and monies. This is, for example, in the African region, estimated to lose the African region upwards of $85 billion a year in revenues because the money just disappears with the materials. Where have they gone? Who's benefited? So that means transparency. And Francis, you've mentioned this. But what became very clear to us, and this came out very clearly in some work that was done by University College London in writing a paper on this issue for Nature, we have to manage resources as a nexus. And in thinking about what we meant by nexus and thinking about the SDGs, the three that stood out all the time as being most essential to the delivery of the SDGs, for example, zero hunger, is food, energy and water. And it was for me very distressing to hear from, for example, the governor of Mariupol, when that city was about to fall, that the three things they needed most for the population of Mariupol were, his words, food, energy and water. The policy brief is also very clear on the damage that's been done by 200, 300 years of the extractive industries, which are then termed in economic terms negative externalities, pollution, mine sites left behind, untreated, etc., but also social, cultural and other damage. And you will remember the terrible damage done recently by the blowing up of a major Aboriginal site in Australia, which had been there for 70,000 years, if I understand it correctly, because somebody in the mining company that did it thought this would be a good idea. It clearly wasn't, and that caused a big revolution in the way that company was managed, which is a fortunate outcome, but a regrettable one. But in that process as well, we need to understand what credibility and trust has been lost and how we return to that, and how we then, working intergenerationally and participatively, how we work together to do this. So thinking very similarly to the way Francis's team has worked, we looked at the 12 principles, but thinking of them in systems terms. And we came down to thinking that there were 4 of great importance for the actual practical development and delivery of RMS as a system. The first is, quoting the UN, balanced and integrated management of resources. Number 2, establishment of and support for the social contract for natural resources. I first floated this idea in the Roundtable 2021. A tracing and tracking tool, and development of competencies and core of capabilities in resource management, which Sigurd and Francis have both talked about. Out of this comes the social resource contract. Purpose of that, equitable and secure access to all resources for all, irrespective of capacity to pay. And that's where the market breaks down, because the market expects a capacity to pay. So what that means is we distinguish between the customer of the system and the consumer. And we're really interested in getting the resources to the consumers who can't afford them. But it also is a deterrent to and a challenge to the trend we're seeing, unfortunately, a lot at the moment, of resource weaponization. So now we look at distributed ledger technology, otherwise known as blockchain. It's perfectly suited to this. For the last 3 months, we've been working on testing our tools available that can deliver this already largely from open source code. And the answer is yes. This project has already moved to the point when we are working on delivering case studies. We discussed these with Francis, for example, in the development of a recent concept paper, and it's very possible to do it. The second is that in blockchain, molecules and monies are fused. They are the same currency. So if you follow the materials, you also follow the money. And if you follow the money, you can find the materials. It bridges, Francis again alluded to this, ESG financing with the elimination of negative externalities. And industries all over the world now are thoroughly committed to not just talking about ESG, but showing by external audit and reporting that they are following the principles of environmental, social and governance. That also involves supply chain certification. So as well as tracking the money, where did this stuff come from? The car you're buying with particular batteries, for example, in it, do you know where the materials came from that went into those batteries? That picks up then an opening statement which triggered this whole thing in 2017 when the then executive secretary of UNECE made the connection directly between the SDGs and the need for public good. That means there are things that go beyond market interest and capital requirements. We, of course, need those. This is not to say they're not necessary. Of course, they're essential. But, and I heard this on my radio in the UK today, the markets are not strong enough to deal with the challenges of the current energy crisis. And that came from the oil and gas industry itself. Now, smart contracts is a way of describing how this is done in an automated way. But the advantage of the blockchain system is now it looks backwards in terms of accounting and audit, but also forward, helping governments and other stakeholders plan and provide security of supply. Into that, we have started to put in critical control point monitoring. If we are monitoring the SDGs and how well we're delivering them, are we able to anticipate, for example, famine in the Horn of Africa and put in place provision for supplying to that famine, or floods in Pakistan? Do we have the means of predicting that now that we begin to realize these are happening with increasing frequency globally? There is no country immune from this, absolutely no country. So these systems we've also checked up. And one of the examples is the Ibm Hyperledger System, which are cross-functional, scalable and versatile. We can go from small case studies to industrial scale delivery in one jump. So the Hyperledger, this is just my last slide. What does it do? Okay. It fits perfectly with the policy brief. The Hyperledger System meets the objectives of the policy brief. It's in open source code, i.e. you don't have to pay expensive licenses to deliver it. You obviously have to pay to host the system, but you don't need to pay to join it. It works a bit like an operating system combined with the World Wide Web. It is a transformative tool for making resources move around and be used more efficiently. So that, in my view, the technology is like the EGRM. The EGRM is a group of experts, each of whom is, in quotes, a block, and that block meets together in various different configurations, including a workshop like this. And then out of that comes a rich and very interesting and development system for managing resources. This simply says the DLT technology, the blockchain, can partner with the experts to deliver what the knowledge is that the experts have. And by fusing those two, and this takes me to the final point, which is Harry Tsilidis' very important insight. If you are thinking of the person who cannot afford food, energy and water, but needs them, what is it you're delivering? You're delivering a service, not a commodity, a service. So at the end, the Brundtland baseline, meeting the needs of the most poor of the world, is a service function. And there is no other way that RMS can function than as resource, as service. Thank you very much. And thank you particularly to the team that I repeat their names here. Thank you. Thank you, Teresa.
So, thank you, Julian. By speaking about distributed ledger technology applied, you made me to attend an MIT course on this topic to know more. Bravo. So, the next speaker is Simon Michaud.
Hello, can you hear me?
Please. Yes, it's okay. From GTK Finland and expert group on resource management. Thank you. The floor is yours, Simon.
Sharing now. All right, can you see the presentation?
Yes, full screen, if you can.
And now we're full screen.
Yes.
All right, rock and roll. So I'm going to present over the next couple of minutes that the industrial ecosystem is actually transforming from a minerals context. So here is a chart where the metals that the World Bank uses to track the health of the economic system, the industrial economic system, have been overlaid. That is, each of the metal prices back to 1960 in a month-by-month basis have been indexed to the number 100 and the month December 2001. I've done this to show periods of relative stability. So periods been relatively stable before 2005, but after 2005, there was a blowout. Now, metal price is the handover point between those who extract the metals from the ground, mining, and those who use those metals to manufacture goods that we want. So you're looking at the heartbeat of the industrial ecosystem. I make the case that that blowout started out as a chain reaction that started in the oil industry in January 2005, which later created the global financial crisis in 2008. That financial crisis, as large as it was not enough to resolve this volatility. So whatever it is not speculation. So the purpose of this chart is to show that the industrial ecosystem is changing, but that change started 17 years ago. It's not something that might happen in the future. So the system is evolving, and we must evolve with it. Here's the second chart where the same numbers have been pinned to the number 100 and January 1970. This is to show that the system underwent a structural change when the US dollar decoupled from the gold standard and the Bretton Woods system was discontinued. So these are the kind of structural changes that can be seen in metal price. So now I'm talking about energy. In terms of energy, energy is our master resource. But as time has gone on, as more population has come online, as our economy has become more complex, we have demanded more energy as time has gone on. So this is historical global energy consumption per capita. We're using more and more each time. That is the Chinese manufacture spike. So the purpose of this chart here is to show that in the last 10 years, energy consumption per capita has actually gone down. Prior to the global financial crisis, the COVID-19 lockdowns, we've actually, about 13 months beforehand, has seen a peak in global energy consumption per capita. This is a flag that the growth-based economics is actually on its way out and about to be transitioned into something else. What is that something else? We should probably discuss it. I did a study that actually looked at phasing out fossil fuels. And so the column on the left is the power that we generated in 2018. The coloured sections are the existing systems we can use. The white sections are the ones that we want to phase out. The column on the right is the power that we want to bring on board. So if we were to phase out fossil fuels, we are talking about the creation of an energy grid quite a bit larger than the existing one using fairly expensive energy. The tasks are charging electric vehicle batteries, producing hydrogen for the hydrogen fuel cells, gas and coal power generation being phased out, heating of the buildings, and the substitution of coal-fired steel manufacture. Now, I've come up with an energy split. Now, this energy split has come from the second generation of work done. It's based on an IEA, an ARENA 2022 prediction of what it would be in 2050. And so I've used that and I've come up with this energy split, and based on statistics of what was actually done in 2018 with the average size plant, I've worked out the number of new plants needed. So we're talking about 586,000 new plants. Put this in context, in 2018, the fleet was 46,000 stations. This reflects the difference in energy return on energy invested of the non-fossil fuel systems compared to the fossil fuel systems. So from that work, I then worked out, well, how many technical units actually in the existing system that we would need to replace. So this is just one generation. So the electric vehicles and their batteries is represented by that. The hydrogen fuel cells is represented by that section. The wind turbines that we would need is that, onshore and offshore. Those are the solar panels. And that is the stationary power storage buffer. That buffer turns out to be most of what we need to do, but that's a very, very conservative estimate. We can go through that in question time if you like. So I took that information and projected the metal content of each unit onto the numbers needed and summed it all together. And then quantities of metal we need up against the 2019 rates of mining production. So that y-axis there is the years of mining rate in 2019 we would need to actually hit the target to produce just one generation of renewable technology to replace our system as it is now. And as you can see, some of those numbers are in the hundreds and some are in the thousands. So we are not going to get to do this in the timescales predicted. The problem is much larger than we think. The chart on the right is now we're actually comparing the blue, which is the metal required, up against the yellow, which is the 2022 reserves as stated in 2022. And as you can see, this is a log scale. A lot of what we need is actually not enough in the ground. And we can go and explore for more, but for every 1,000 deposits discovered, only 1 or 2 become mines. The time taken to develop a discovered deposit is about 15 to 20 years after it's been discovered. And for every 10 producing mines, 2 or 3 will shut down for market conditions. Now, to put this in context, Prior to 2020, we mined 700 million tons of copper back to 4000 BC. To keep up with economic growth the way we think we're going to do it, we will mine 700 million metric tons in the next 22 years alone. Now, current reserves 880 million tons, so we've got about 30 years of production in reserves. Of course, we can go and find more. But we want 4.6 billion tons of copper just to manufacture one generation of renewable technology, with the understanding that these units wear out after 10 to 20 years, and we have to then go and do it again. That is 6.4 times the historical mining volumes. So coming to an end, when we talk about our human society at the moment, what we see in the news is economics and technology only. What's actually happening is there's actually four aspects: energy, minerals, economics, and technology. You cannot consider one of these aspects without the other three. They're actually different aspects of the same thing. But there's the explicit understanding that all of these systems are harvesting feedstock from the planetary environment. So this is actually how a system is really structured. And any replacement system will have to do the same things. And what is being discussed today, I believe, is the first step I have seen towards this holistic idea of managing our mineral resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. So we move to the next speaker, which is, we will talk about critical raw material secondary resource management. It will be Ulrich Kahl from Austrian Environment Agency and chair of Anthropogenic Resources Working Group and Expert Group on Resource Management. Ulrich, floor is yours.
Yes. Hello, good morning. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Do you see the slides?
Yes, everything perfect.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, good morning. I'm Ulrich from Environment Agency Austria, and I cordially thank you for providing a short input on 5 minutes on the management of CRMs. I cordially also thank my co-authors, Patrick Weger and Alessandra Holl. Both of them are from Switzerland, and I collaborated with them to provide a policy paper on the management of CRMs with a special focus on circular economy. Let me start with the demand and supply, which perfectly fits to the previous talk. Thank you very much for this. If we focus just on the demand of minerals, that excludes steel and aluminium, the International Energy Agency did a prospective study on the future demand of minerals based on the Sustainable Development Scenario. And they found out that up to the year 2040, the demand for minerals is 4 times more than now. And if we're looking to the, and this is just for the renewable energy technologies and the storage of renewable energy technologies. It does not include all the other applications, for instance, electronic equipment, mineral fertilizers, and all the other applications that profit from CRMs. And if you switch to the supply side, it becomes clear that the future supply will be dominated by primary production, just because of the huge amount of quantities that are currently required. And recycling, of course, played a role, but it cannot offset primary production in terms of quantities in order to meet the future demand. This is just because all these CRMs are currently not in our society and not are available for recycling. This might change in the future because more and more CRMs are produced through mining into society and will become available for recycling too. However, recycling and even beyond recycling, circular economy gets more attention for several reasons. One reason is are the financial gains. Just to take waste electronic and equipment as an example. Currently, in the European Union, only about 30% of the waste electronic and equipment is collected and recycled later on. The remaining 60% are currently not separately collected, so they are either exported or are enter other waste streams that are not directed to recycling. And if we are looking for these 60%, incorporate them into the recycling system, the estimated amount of financial gains is about 2 to 4 billion euro. So this just demonstrates the opportunity, the financial opportunities if circular economy is fully implemented in a society. But it also has introducing circular economy through more recycling and sharing and leasing also generates environmental impacts. Just if you're looking on the production of CRMs through recycling compared to primary production, there is less energy needed to produce CRMs from recycling compared to mining. I think if the secondary sources are used to produce CRMs, it also helps to diversify the supply of CRMs. So it can be recycled on domestic areas with less dependency on third countries, and it also helps to make a shift from primary to secondary CRM productions. And indeed, it also helps to create new jobs in the recycling industry. But what is a circular economy for managing CRMs? Of course, the European Commission and also Eurostat provided a definition on circular economy. There are many others, but this is one of it. So the circular economy aims to maintain the value of products, materials, and resources for as long as possible in our society. And of course, there are different enablers to maintain the value of products, materials, and resources as long as it's possible in our society. It's one example is the product design. So product design can help to make products more repairable and therefore extend the lifetime. And lifetime extensions reduce the demand for new virgin material. Another example is to increase the usage intensity of products. This can be done through sharing and leasing. There are prominent examples for car sharing, for instance, in Germany, and studies estimated the decrease of new cars if car sharing is fully developed in Germany. And it's really a significant contribution to reduce the number of cars and therefore also the quantities for CRMs in the electronic of cars. A third example is the extension of product lifetimes through repair, refurbishing, and remanufacturing. There are very good examples from industry for copy machines, for instance, where the product is provided to the customer and then remanufactured by the company itself. And this, of course, extends the lifetime of the product itself. And as mentioned before, product lifetime extensions decrease the need for new products and therefore the need for new virgin materials because it maintains the value of the products in the society. And indeed, the fourth option is, of course, recycling of CRMs from post-consumer residues, but also the recovery of CRMs from extractive industry residues. And this brings me to the last slide. Let me check this. I've heard from Charlotte at the beginning that this webinar is dedicated to the opportunities of the crisis. And I think that circular economy offers a lot of opportunities and supportive instruments to move towards a circular economy and therefore manage the CRMs and the materials in general in a sustainable way. One option is that policymakers develop national circular economy strategies with a focus on CRMs. Indeed, a lot of countries globally and also in the European Union develop these strategies, but CRMs are mostly not covered in these strategies. And as it becomes a more urgent issue to provide CRMs to manage the transition to renewable energy system, I think a focus on CRM should be added to these strategies. Of course, a strategy alone doesn't change things. It also needs to be complemented with action plans that define precise measures to unlock the full potential of sharing, repairing, remanufacturing, and recycling across industries, but also for the end consumer. Here is also the example for WEE, so waste electronic equipment. As already mentioned at the beginning, for instance, in the European Union, only 40% of the waste electronic and equipment is collected and sent to treatment and therefore also to recycling plants. So the collection rate can be increased by introducing separate collection schemes for waste electronic and equipments. So this would be one action within the action plan. Another opportunity is to enable green finance mechanisms to sustainable extraction of CRMs in the mining sector, but also in the recycling sector to extract the CRMs from post-consumer residues. And last but not least, at the very end, let's say, CRMs come from the development of recovery projects. So in order to keep CRMs in the society, the CRMs need to be recovered at the end of the lifetime of the project of the products, and this requires recycling projects or recovery projects to extract the CRMs from extractive industry residues. And this brings me also to the toolbox that the UNECE is providing. It's the UNFC, it's the United Nations Framework Classification Tool in order to assess the viability or feasibility of such recovery projects. And I think this is of crucial importance because it assesses the viability through mapping the barriers and the enablers to move a project forward towards production. And the barriers can be turned into enablers, let's say, by including, for instance, policy and regulators to set the framework conditions for the projects, and also by including the industry that provides the capability to develop these recovery projects in detail. And just one final comment. The European Commission is now funding via Horizon a new project that is called Futuram. It's the future availability of secondary raw materials. And this has a very strong focus on critical raw materials. And within this Horizon project, there will be a couple of case studies that apply the UN framework classification for resources in order to make feasibility studies for CRM recovery. This will be so the UNFC will be applied to extractive industry residues, but also to post-consumer residues such as WEEE. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Ulrich, and thank you for bringing the topic of circular economy, so important for our resource management systems and the opportunities to take. So I move the floor to the presentation of UNRMS for policymakers. It will be done by Bob Felix from African Union and member of UNRMS and of expert group resource management. Bob, the floor is yours. Please keep the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Teresa. First of all, up to this point in time, of course, I believe that the audience have had a fair understanding of what URMS is and what it intends to achieve. Of course, we are from the presentations that we have had already, even from just the one of Ulrich, it is clear that the demand for minerals have quadrupled from what he has just mentioned. We have also seen the presentation from Simon recognizing the fact that there is a shortfall in minerals. So it goes therefore without saying that there is a need to have a more robust resource management system that takes care of the challenges that we meet at the time for a sustainable future. And Charlotte mentioned this very well in her remarks in recognizing the threats, but being aware of the opportunities, because we will require a paradigm shift on how we manage resources. Why? Because resources are limited. And the limited resources we have, we should be able to utilize them sustainably. So that is right at the center of what policymakers will have to deal with in the future. Of course, every resource management tool like this one that we have developed requires implementation, and implementation are driven by policies, and policies are designed by policymakers. But what are those? What guides policy making is what I'm going to try and elaborate briefly this morning. So what are the policy enablers that UNRMS brings into the picture at this critical time? So even whether we are talking about meeting maybe SDG number 7, clean and affordable energy for all, or we are talking about climate action, SDG number 13, or meeting the needs or kicking out poverty from the world. We are looking at, we are pursuing a standard integrated resource management system that takes care of the complete value chain, the social, economic, and environmental considerations on how we manage resources. In the African continent, we have adopted this, of course, through the development, and now we are entering the implementation of the African Mineral Resource Classification and Management System. But the UNRMS is unique in its nature because it requires a complete shift away from the silos approach. Of course, in the past, different countries, different regions have had a relatively silos approach to management of resources. But if we want sustainability on the management of our resources, then we need to have it in a more integrated manner, such that we assess the value chain, we look at where the raw materials are, we assess them, we value them, and then we be able to bridge those gaps on the energy requirements and resource requirements of the planet. At the center of utilizing this world resources capital, UNRMS comes to meet the society needs in order to achieve the Agenda 2030. And I've mentioned this already in as far as the SDGs are concerned, because we cannot now live in isolation when we have a global problem that affects every part of the continent. And so that requires an enabler in policy making so that we can be able to achieve we can be able to meet the challenges of the time. How do we do that? We require to strengthen some of the good practices that we have learned over time and avoid those that are not working. We cannot continue doing the same thing that we have done in the past with the global challenge that we are meeting currently and expect to meet the challenges of the future. For us to do that, we need to shift away from the approaches that did not work in the past and embrace those that are working. And Africa, for example, is at the center of this because a lot of raw materials come from Africa. For example, if you're talking about cobalt alone in Congo, how can we be able to utilize that to meet the global challenges? If you're talking about lithium, if you're talking about nickel, how can we be able to use the resources that we have, limited as they are, in order to actually achieve the objective of the Agenda 2030? And that's what we're looking at. So as a policymaker, what are the good practices that we need to adopt? Of course, there are a lot of things that I can talk about as far as policy making and policy drivers are concerned, but these are some of the key aspects and practices that we will need to adopt in order to meet our future goals and have a sustainable management of our resources. The first thing we need to do is, as a policy driver, we need to locate, map, and develop the inventory of our resources that are needed for sustainable development. And this has been done, has been adopted at UNFC, which we have developed and working in collaboration with the UNRMS, has come up with a more robust system that helps to locate, map, and also estimate the resources that we have around the planet. So if we can be able to map these resources, locate where they are, and have inventory of these critical raw materials, or for example, maybe some could call it critical, others may call it strategic raw materials for that matter. As long as we have this mapped out, we can be able to plan for them for better sustainable resource management. So policies have to be driven by ensuring, first and foremost, where are these resources? How can we locate them? How much are they? And then we can be able to utilize them properly for sustainable development. The second aspect is the need to identify the existing raw material value chains in order to prevent wastage. This is the whole concept of circularity that Ulrich was talking about. We should be able to utilize what would be naturally recognized as a waste in one process as a raw material in the next process, so that we avoid wastage because we have limited resources. And how do we do that? We have to plug some of those supply chain vulnerabilities and the gaps that exist in the value chain. And we must be able to utilize the resources, the limited resources, in order to meet the challenges of the time by ensuring that there is no waste in our value chain. So that is very important and key as a policy driver when we are developing policies and as far as the UNRMS is concerned. The third aspect is the need to maximize value of resources at the source and reduce production costs globally. Why is this important? SDG number 17 talks about partnership. So if we have a raw material in Gabon or in South Africa or in Venezuela, for example, what we need to do as a policy is to try and maximize value at the source without necessarily transferring or transporting raw materials elsewhere and processing them. Can we be able to develop policies that add value at the source of the raw material instead of transporting it elsewhere? The other one is the need to transfer technology where it's needed the most. So we can build synergies between the developers of technology and where that technology is employed, so that we do not have to transport raw materials away from the sources to where the technologies are. We can build partnership by ensuring there is mutual benefit between the countries or the regions that requires technology and the regions that have the raw materials. So those are some of the good practices that we need to develop in policymaking in order to achieve the objective of the UNRMS. So what are some of the things that we need to avoid in policy making? The neglect of local communities and stakeholders, as I'm about to conclude. This is very important. Why? Because failing to to gain the social contract to operate in an area will undermine sustainable development. And this we have seen over the years, that if stakeholders in local communities where raw materials exist are not taken care of, then we have revolt. We have disagreements between the local leaders. We have projects will not proceed because the local communities have not been taken care of. The other one is the lack of transparency, and Julian mentioned this very importantly because it's part of the 12 principles of the UNRMS. Transparency and restriction to access of data will actually jeopardize the complete potential of a resource. So for us to get value out of the resource, we need to be able to access data. We need transparency in the operations, in the dealing of governments and corporations, so that we can be able to achieve the objective of the UNRMS. The other one is the unregulated and informal natural resource sectors, which reduces government benefits and increases cost. We know, of course, of the billions of dollars that are lost in illicit financial flows. Unless we have transparency, unless we have formal sectors and we have work in partnership, we cannot be able to achieve the objective of the UNRMS. So policy making requires that we have all these sectors formally regulated and recognized both nationally and internationally. And that goes hand in hand with issues to do with health, safety and environment, labor standards. So we would like to, what UNRMS is trying to achieve is to ensure that we have minimum labor standards. So you do not have to go and find people in gold mine in Ghana, for example, that do not have the same labor standards with those in South Africa or anywhere around the world. So these are some of the key policy drivers that that the UNRMS is looking at trying to guide, so that we have a holistic and a complete integrated resource management system that takes care of both the interest of the interest of corporations, the interest of governments, and the global challenge of meeting the 21st century problem, especially right now, the issues of energy transition and climate action. So in conclusion, because of lack of time, the primary guide to policymaking are the 12 fundamental principles of UNRMS. And Julian talked about that. Issues to do with service-oriented, value addition, circularity, innovation, and so on and so forth. And then the integrated resource management is key for achieving this and achieving the 2030 agenda. It's important that we integrate our resource management so that we can be able to utilize the limited resources that we have, and we map the value chain of these raw materials in order to achieve our global agenda. And lastly, of course, UNRMS is designed to ensure that these challenges of the 21st century are met together with everybody else around the world, where the raw materials are, the interest parties, the technology, and we work in synergy in order to achieve that global objective. I would like to end here in the interest of time.
Thank you, Bob.
Into this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Now we have a problem of time. So we move to the panel that will be moderated by Karen Hankosh, Director of British Geological Survey and Vice Chair of Expert Group on Resource Management. And we'll have with her Neil Glover from Rolls-Royce, Peter Hopkinson from the National Interdisciplinary Circular Economy Research, and Jayoti Ahuja from Medford Tech. So, Karen, I move the floor to you, and I would like to, if you would be able to moderate the time and keep the panel on 35-40 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Teresa. It's probably not the first time in world history that a conference has gone a little bit over time, but hopefully we can sort of regroup here. As Teresa said, my name is Karen Hanghoy. I'm the director of the British Geological Survey, and I have a very distinguished panel with me today. If I start in my sort of top left corner here, we have Neil Glover, who's come to us from Rolls-Royce, where he's the head of materials research. And also Neil is the president of the Institute of Materials, Minerals and Mining. We have Jyoti Ahuja, who is joining from Birmingham Law School. And we have Peter Hopkinson from Exeter University, who is a professor of circular economy and an expert in circular economy. And we have Tom Bide, who is a colleague of mine from BGS and who is a sort of expert in understanding what we need in terms of demand of raw materials and how we are working with that. And so I think we'll just jump straight in, since we have a little bit short on time here. I'm going to start with you, Tom, actually. Tom from also the British Geological Survey, and just sort of a general question on the demand side and what do we actually think is going to happen. So what are your thoughts on the sourcing of metals, and maybe specifically critical metals, for the sort of low carbon transition that we are seeing around the world now?
Well, I mean, we had a lot of very interesting talks about that sort of very specific thing today, and I think it's very clear that things are going to get worse before they're going to get better. Demand is going to increase. This is a problem that we're going to have for some time, and it's a really hard problem to solve, I think. There's a huge demand for things like battery raw materials, and to kind of supply this requires really joined up long-term thinking. I think this has suffered from a kind of very linear approach before. You've kind of sort of, especially for sort of batteries and EV raw materials, this has been framed as an energy problem in a very linear way. But we can't just switch straight from sourcing our energy from oil and gas fields to sourcing our energy from brine fields in South America, for example. That just won't work in terms of supply, and it certainly won't work in terms of equitable outcomes for people in those countries affected by mining. So to do this, to solve these problems, I think the way we are going to solve these problems of supply are going to be to try and we need this huge amount of knowledge, huge amount of understanding, and huge amount of integration of new raw data. Some of this raw data doesn't even exist yet, especially for things like critical raw materials with really complex supply chains, which are going to require a huge collaboration between a variety of stakeholders, and to think about this in a really kind of in a systems context to get this sort of circular economy approach. And this is where things like the UNRMS really come into their own. And I think there really is a need for this kind of holistic overview approach to kind of do this. I think in the past, supply has been dominated by geologists. There's been quite a siloed approach, and I say this as a geologist. But I think we're now seeing a real need to incorporate things like people like social scientists, end users, downstream industry into this process. And I think there's going to be a huge focus as well in terms of public involvement from looking at transparency and supply chains, and this also is going to require a huge amount of new data and new understanding. And I think, you know, we're doing this now. We're going to see this. There's projects being undertaken to kind of look at this, but it's really hard. It's really hard to do. It's really complicated, and we're very much beginning the process.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I was just going to see if I was muted. I wasn't muted. So you mentioned the circular approaches. So this is a very sort of convenient dive into a little bit more on circular economy. And of course, Ulrich has already presented us with some of the thinking here and also some of the challenges. And Peter, you are an expert and a professor of circular economy, and you have proposed a model of facades as a survey. So how does that align? Is that a good model? Is that a way forward?
Hi, Karen. Yeah, I'll post a reference to the paper that we've just had published for people to look at it in a bit more details. But when we're talking about resource as a service, we're looking at resources within products, and how can we shift from an ownership model to an access model or a service or a performance model, and with the hypothesis that by doing that we will drive up resource productivity, we will extend the life of products, and there'll be benefits for all actors across the sort of the supply and value chain. So in the work that we were doing, we were trying to move from proof of concept to proof of value. So most of the work I do is saying that the circular economy has been around for about 12 years. In its current sort of guise, and we've got a lot of words and we've got a lot of discussion and a lot of conceptualization. We need to move the agenda now to look at proof of value. So the case we looked at was just taking facades as a service. Who wants to own a facade? Nobody, really. They're big lumps of material on the front of a building. They last a long time. They're high capital cost, they need maintaining, they're a right pain in the backside if you're honest. So can we look at how you might move from ownership to a service model? And of course, if the circular economy was so great and product service systems were so great, we'd see these things popping up everywhere. You know, there'd be fantastic investment opportunities, but they're not. So there's obviously some significant barriers to overcome. So we looked at, you know, in the circular economy with the work we do around business modeling, you always have to have your reference case, your base case, you know, as Tom said, the linear model, the ownership model, a product that maybe lasts 30 years, then something happens to it. Usually it's scrapped or it falls into disrepair. So we created something called the total value of ownership framework to look at different ways of structuring a service and a performance model against a traditional ownership model, and you find it's really difficult. It's really challenging around accounting systems, legal systems that Giotti was going to say something about subsequently. But if you start to look at value in a different way, and you start to expand the concept of value, you start to create a positive business case for facades as a service. What you have to do is you have to build in the shadow price of carbon, which ordinarily wouldn't be included in an ownership model. You have to look at things like the weighted cost of capital. So if you don't purchase and own a facade, you can use the capital for something else, etc., etc. So it's not an easy it's a way of creating sort of silver bullet. It's not a silver bullet, but read the paper, give us some feedback, and we can talk for 2 hours about other examples if you so wish.
Super, excellent. Thank you very much, Peter. So along the same lines, I think, Neil, at Rolls-Royce, you have a lot of experience with resource as a service. And well, do you have a do you think that this is going to be more important in the future as we go forward? Any comments on that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Firstly, I was just having a little trouble getting off mute. Yep.
We hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I'm speaking from a slightly different perspective today, from the perspective of an OEM or an equipment producer, or in the case of many of our sectors, essentially a service supplier, a provider of power. We're operating in aerospace and critical power systems, as you're aware, which are both resource intensive and difficult to decarbonize. But in many cases, we're no longer providing a product for ownership by the customer. We're providing power on a by-hour contract. So for aero engines, as you're aware, people will no longer typically buy an aero engine. They will simply pay the producer, Rolls-Royce, an hourly fee for the availability of that engine, and the asset remains in the ownership of the OEM throughout its lifetime. So that gives us some particular advantages when it comes to the managing of the resources within that product. We can design the product for its whole life cycle to optimize the business case and the resource efficiency. And we retain control of all of the servicing and the spares supply and the end of life fate of all of that material. So we're able to understand both the initial origin and the full service history of that material and the full definition of the material that's in the product, and then route it back at either service points when components come out of engines and are replaced by spares, or route it back at end of life through disassembly into recycling streams to capture that value back into the supply chain at the highest possible point. So we would always want to return it back into a like commodity stream into our aerospace product if possible, and then would only cascade down through the value streams into the likes of steel making, where we couldn't preserve the alloy in its original form. So that's very powerful for us and has enabled us a part of the solution to resolving some of the issues around our conventional critical materials concerns, things like rhenium and platinum group metals. How transferable that is across other markets, I think is difficult for me to say. I mean, I see a certain range of products. I'm very conscious that a solution for a given technology and market isn't necessarily readily transferable into a different market, as we've just heard for construction and infrastructure type projects. The dynamics may be very different. We have to be very careful of unintended consequences. We ourselves, of course, are going through a transformation as we look to decarbonize sectors like air transport, and we move to new technologies like hybridization, electrification, alternate fuels, hydrogen combustion fuel cells and the like, which will change our palette of critical materials and materials concerns, and will change the issues that we have to deal with. But in terms of growth of demand, sustainability, supply, ethics, and embedded carbon and so on. But I think the fundamental principles will remain the same, that we will need to have robust and reliable data on the materials that we're consuming. How much are we consuming? Where is it coming from? What are its embedded sustainability credentials? We'll need to be able to rely on that data and have some sort of strength of audit behind it. We'll then need to embed that into robust design practice and technology development. So we're making the right decisions, and we're not just displacing impact from one life cycle point to another or from one impact category to another. And then we need to be very conscious of efficiency through manufacture to make sure we capture all the waste streams into our revert. And then the kind of business models that we've just discussed in the relationships with supply chain. I think we'll see the relationships with supply chain changing because we will need access to this data, and the availability of data and the specific environmental credentials of materials and components supplied will become competitively significant, as well as cost and quality traditionally. And that will require different ways of operating because they'll be sharing of quite confidential information potentially within there.
So we're sort of back to Tom's sort of opening line that we really need data in order to find the solutions. We need to understand the stocks and the flows and how everything moves around.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely critical. I mean, you can't make the right design decisions and operating decisions unless you really understand the impact of the technologies you're selecting. And you can't design your product optimally for life unless you have that right data, and that data has to be correct and reliable, and it has to be specific to the particular value stream and supply chain you've got and what their energy mix is and so on.
Yeah, I think if I can just dig a little bit deeper before I go to Jyoti, because there's a question in the chat about how does it actually work, and there's an example of how does it work with a car. And if I can just sort of preempt your answer to that question from Emma Schofield, one sort of explanation of how does this actually work that I've heard in the past that was sort of transformative for how I thought about it was someone who gave the example of selling light instead of selling light bulbs. Whereas if you're selling light bulbs, it's in your interest that people buy as many as possible. So there's some element of that business model where you want the light bulbs to break so that people have to buy new ones, because the more light bulbs you can sell, the better your business actually is. Whereas if you don't sell light bulbs, but you sell light, then actually it's in your interest, and your best business model would be for the light bulbs to last as long as possible so that you can deliver as much light as possible for as long as possible without having to put new resource into it. And that for me is a very easy way to understand these circular business models, or a product as a service, rather than we all have to own a gazillion light bulbs, for example. But Emma's question actually goes straight to cars. So I'm going to go back to you on that one, Neil, because she says, if someone uses a car, are they buying an off-gas cleaning service from us, catalytic converter supplier, plus the ability to progress from a tires company, plus. So of course there are many light bulbs, if you will, in a car. So how is it actually going to work in the car industry in the future? How are we thinking about this?
It's difficult for me to say how it would work in the car industry, because that's not my
No.
sector. I mean, clearly it currently works very differently, doesn't it, when you lease a vehicle, because you don't necessarily lease that vehicle for whole of life. And at some point at that lease end, then it perhaps goes back into an ownership model somewhere else going through auction and so on. And that ownership to end of life is potentially lost. Peter, hand up there to comment.
Yeah, Peter has a comment on this one. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat, so I don't want to sort of take up airtime, but we could send you a couple of examples. I mean, the best case example we know, but which looks at how you can rethink the vehicle from multiple circular economy perspectives is River Simple. So we can post that, and that can go out in the literature. And that's a very interesting and different model, but it comes from a startup business rather than an incumbent. The best example, I think, in the incumbent and which is beginning to move away from the classic manufacture, ownership, sales model is Renault. So they are evolving at scale a circular economy ecosystem in which they are linking remanufacture, reuse, recycling, mobility as a service, using the battery not for grid services, for domestic and commercial energy storage. And they're building a new facility in the north of Paris that brings all this together. So we're seeing before us a particular, vehicle manufacturer beginning to change its underlying business model and seeing itself operating in a much broader ecosystem. And I think that's what we need, and that's what we need to see more of in different sectors. End of piece.
Super. Okay, I'm going to jump to Jyoti now. We can always return to topics of interest, but Jyoti has a slightly different background, I think, than most of the speakers today and most of the people on this panel. So it's not really the technical background, but more sort of the legal background. And so, what, in your opinion, how should regulation of science and technology, and perhaps even more importantly, industry, how does that need to be strengthened to achieve the sustainability goals? Do you see that these models where products are a service or metals are a service, could they help support the circular economy with the right kind of legal framework?
I mean, that they could help to support a circular economy. I think there's, emerging kind of excitement about why it might be a really good thing. So we ourselves wrote a paper about 2-3 years ago, this was, and we particularly chose electric vehicles. And there's a concern around EV batteries, because those are the storehouse of a lot of critical minerals, and we kind of spoke about how servitization models for EV batteries, where you ensure that the EV battery comes back into the loop where the critical materials can be recycled, remanufactured, or you can put the battery to another second use. How servitization could be a way of ensuring that those batteries do come back instead of disappearing. You know, cars do get lost in the system. In the EU, you've had 3.5 to 4.5 million cars that have disappeared. So yeah, you know, that it can have an advantage is, I think, there's more and more emerging evidence to say yes, it would help build a more sustainable business model. But having said that, you know, there are a few kind of caveats and worries that we must remember around it. So first of all, one of the big questions with regulation and servitization is the extent to which it's even possible to regulate business models. It would actually be highly unusual, you know, to regulate a business model that industry would pursue. This is done for some product streams like pharmaceuticals and things, but it's only done in very strong cases of market failure. Normally, you know, particularly within the UK or the EU, we tend to rely on markets to shape business models. You know, we kind of say, well, consumers will demand what's good, and that's going to shape things by itself. But sometimes this might not work quite so well, because some harms from some products, some environmental harms particularly, might not be immediately visible. They might be things that we're worried would happen in the future. And so there isn't that demand at this point in time, but we've got to take some action at this point in time. We can't always afford to wait for the harms to happen when it comes to the environment and for consumers to begin to demand change. You know, so where we know that there is going to be significant future benefit, sometimes legal and policy interventions are actually needed to steer the market in the direction that we want to steer it. But having said that, you know, it seems really unlikely that politically there's any government that would want to say you absolutely have to, you know, apply only this particular servitization business model to this product. You can't sell the product, you can only lease it out. It's not going to happen. So maybe a better way that regulation might work here is, rather than a command and control system, you set up incentives, you know, just to gently steer the market in the direction that you want to. So you might have incentives, for example, in the form of tax breaks to companies that offer leasing schemes. You might offer, you know, carbon credits, for example, to industry. So there's many different ways in which regulation could be used. It's not always hard regulation, but sometimes the softer forms of regulation can also do a lot to shape the market. But I think, you know, so we've kind of held for a long time that when it comes to EV batteries, leasing the battery, so a person could buy the car, but not the battery. The battery remains in the ownership of the company. And there are companies, you know, Peter's mentioned Renault, but Renault's also done this thing. You know, the Renault Zoe was a car that you could buy where you only paid for the rest of the car. It was only the battery that remained in the control of the manufacturer and had to be returned to them. I don't think that scheme's available in the UK anymore. It didn't work very well for some reason. And that's, again, you know, points to why regulation might help, some incentives might help to keep those good ideas going. But I think Peter's also made, and a few others have made some really good points as well, that you've also got to think about potential downsides, potential, you know, disruptors of these, of having very new models. So a model, a servitization model is going to need more research, more data. Several people have made that point, not just on the mechanisms by which we're going to implement these models, but also on any, you know, foreseeable industry effect. So what might be the effect on consumer choice? What might be the effect on garages, for example, you know, if batteries were owned by somebody else and the car was owned by somebody else? The other potential downside of servitization models is that there's a risk that certain organizations, you know, or countries might acquire a monopoly over the most critical or the most value products. So we need to remain mindful of the disruption that might happen if all business models become, you know, purely servitization. But having said that, if those difficulties are thought through, you know, and it is planned carefully, I think servitization could definitely, or leasing products, you know, you intensify the use, you make sure products are used to the maximum, you get maximum value from them. So undoubtedly, it has the potential to be a more sustainable business model.
Okay. Thank you very much. There's a question here that in the chat that I'm going to throw out to everyone to deal with, and maybe it kind of follows a little bit on what you said as well. Jyoti, because one question I sort of had of you that I'd like all of you to think about a little bit is whether, is this a national problem or is it a global problem? You talked about tax incentives and things like that, which is typically something you can implement nationally. So to what extent do things need to be international? And maybe this question goes hand in hand with that. And it's from Obadiah Kato. And his question is, some resource management systems already exist in the market space, and he gives some examples, SP, PRMS, SEC, etc. And I note that the UNFCS takes into consideration a wider scope of resources. Is there a strategy for the UNFC or the management system, the UNRMS, to coexist with such pre-existing management systems? And so I guess the reason I think the two questions kind of go hand in hand is that the UNFC and the UNRMS, of course, are thought to be something that is globally endorsed and implemented. I don't know if anyone wants to have a go at that. I know, Tom, I'm going to look at you, yes, because I know you've actually really studied the UNRMS and have perhaps thought about this as part of your study. So you go ahead and start.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, this is, I think, a very, very complicated question. Obviously, there are resource management is not a new thing. It's not a new field. Sigurd, it gets spoke. We've heard several examples today about why business is good for business and businesses use these sort of systems. I think what's different about the UNRMS and what makes UNRMS different from perhaps existing systems like the petroleum one that was mentioned in the question is the complexity involved. I mean, all these systems have various levels of complexity. We've heard today the 54 requirements in the principles for UNRMS. Those kind of free scopes that Sigurd mentioned in his talk. Sort of marrying these economic aspects with all the myriad of ESG considerations as well, across the entire supply chain as well, which is enormous. So the complexity of this absolutely blows my mind. I certainly can't kind of get my head around the whole thing, but I think this is where we need to be, and this is where we need to go. This is, I think, a real gap in global knowledge, and I think this is something that the UNRMS, I think could be a tool that could be really, really helpful here. Obviously, there are other tools that are being developed, but I think but I don't think such a system currently exists that can cope with the level of complexity required for the kind of things that we've been talking about today. And I think this is, so this is something that the UNRMS could be ideally developed to try and sort of solve this question.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that from the panel, or any thoughts on the national versus global? Peter.
Yeah. One of the tasks that we've got in the NICE program is developing a national circular economy data observatory, which obviously can't sit in isolation from its global relations. So we face this challenge on a daily basis, and what you've just said in the question is a really good one about interoperability. So I think the UN framework is excellent, and in all cases that we run a continuous process of data and knowledge mapping to look at how the work we're doing maps and is interoperable, and if it isn't, can we use techniques like machine learning and AI to deal with variation and differences. So it's a never-ending problem, but there are solutions. So the first thing is data and knowledge mapping, and the second is not allow that to stop you making progress. I think that's the key. That there's always a risk, as Tom said, this is so complex and can get so big that you spend so much time dealing with the complexity, you actually don't deliver anything useful or practical at the end of it. So you need to be able to work in both the sort of the mapping and the understanding and landscape mapping stage, but also the practicality, as Neil's described, get things done, even if it's not perfect. We haven't got time, and always be aware of unintended consequences and rebound effects, but don't let that stop you. Just make sure everything is transparent, etc., etc. As I think it was Julian in his presentation earlier that was saying about making things visible, verifiable, and valuable.
Yeah, there's been a few comments as well in the chat. There's been a very active chat going on throughout the day, which is very good. And there's been comments as well about, for example, this this problem of perhaps sometimes exporting environmental issues in the name of sustainability and being green. Oh, we're going to recycle. We're going to send it somewhere where we don't actually know exactly how they're going to recycle it, and we're not going to monitor it, and we're not going to take any responsibility for it. But we can check a box that says we are really recycling. So that's again that tension between national and international. So, what's the solution here? What do you think? Anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can have.
I thought, I thought it was really interesting. Francis's first presentation talking about, potential mining in the UK and the resurgence of mining in the UK for critical raw materials. I think, especially in places of highest demand, in Europe, we've gone away from mining in recent years. We've outsourced that environmental problem to other countries, effectively because mining is seen as a dirty industry with lots of problems associated with it. Now, I think looking forward to modern mining, there's no reason why we can't do it with kind of minimal environmental impact. And I think perhaps we should look towards our own resources and and sort of developing more primary resources nearer the main development markets, and we can ensure that those are done to the kind of highest sustainable principles as well, and also ensure that maximum value is extracted from these resources with regard to critical raw materials and byproducts and things. So I think something like that is a solution. I think we need to think about really where we source these materials from, and is indigenous mining possibly a solution?
Okay, I'll go to Joji first, and then to Peter and Neil. Go ahead, Joji.
No, very much. I think I just wanted to say what Tom said. It really that we've exported our carbon footprint and sort of made it look like we've met that's the way we've used to meet our targets. I think we all do have responsibility now to look within and to take some responsibility for reducing that exporting. Having said that, I think the Basel Convention, I agree with, I think Emma put a comment on the chat. It does perhaps need a rethink, because I think there are also downsides to overly restricting. I think the answer, you're never going to find a perfect solution. What you're going to inevitably be faced with in any answer you come up with is trade-offs. And what we need to do, I think, as a society is to sit down and say, what are our priorities really, and which are the trade-offs we're willing to live with, and which are the ones, that we put a lower value on. So we're never going to meet all of our requirements from urban mining, from recycling. We've also got to look at restarting some of those industries that we just didn't want because we didn't want them in our backyard. So I think that was a great point, Tom.
Great, thanks. Peter.
Yeah, good start point. We'd stop using or hiding consumption of resources in national material accounts. We use DMC, domestic material consumption, but rather than RMC, which tells you the total footprint. And once you start to do that, you see that your overall resource consumption is far higher, sometimes a factor of 2. Greater than perhaps is reported in national material accounts. That's the first thing. Second is you've got to link all phases of the value chain, as Bob and others were saying in their earlier presentations. We've heard quite a lot this morning in the upstream, and we're having a bit of a discussion about the use phase, and we need to have much more linkage between the use phase, the post first life cycle stage, and the inbound stage as a complete system, as Tom said earlier. And data is key to that, so we know where, when, who, how, what, when, because without that we can't do very much. And we've got to recognise that the individual countries, exist within global systems, and we're in a period of massive turbulence and volatility for all sorts of reasons. Therefore, any national approach has got to reach out and see itself as part of a global commons. We're all in it together.
Neil, did you have a comment on this?
I think if we're talking about that kind of exporting of environmental impact and exporting of end-of-life responsibility and sort of lack of lack of ownership there. That all comes from not valuing the raw materials that we're using and the products that we're producing, not valuing truly their economic importance or their business continuity criticality or their environmental impact. I think the kind of the recognition of some of those factors is very much come home over recent years and recent months. I think the kind of extended ownership models or business models that we have encourage that thinking to think through the full life cycle and what you have to do with it. And increasingly, I think product reporting, product certification for sustainability will drive that kind of behavior. We are going to have to do accurate life cycle analysis of products and report on those sustainability criteria. So we'll have to account throughout the entire life cycle in that process, and that will drive us to take responsibility for those end of life impacts as well as the through life usage impacts.
I think everyone is absolutely right here, and I think that further on, if we go back all the way to Charlotte this morning about a crisis also being an opportunity, or that being half of the Chinese sign, is the fact that different countries are in different places, if you will. On this, is that also an opportunity for products as a service? Because if you look at around the globe, there are countries where you have increasing middle class population right now, which is something that, for example, in the UK we had about 50 years ago. But there are places where this is a development that's current, and that maybe mean that we could start off on a different business model in some places than we started off with ourselves. So it's not so much a transformation as it is just a new way of doing things, because we've learned something from the last 50 years. Is that an opportunity? These products as a services across the globe. Do you think about that from Rolls-Royce, for example, being now that you're an industry representative here? Do you think that's on the agenda of producers as a business model?
I think that is an opportunity, both new geographies entering into markets and being able to be adopters of new business models, and perhaps new demographics entering into markets with younger people with a different view of what they would want in terms of a service versus a product. And potentially as well with new technologies coming into the market, the ownership models may be very different. So all of those things can perhaps avoid the inertia that we have in our embedded structures for existing products in existing markets. And that may be really true of consumer products, I guess, where lots of resources are distributed and mixed and very difficult to recover. That might be quite powerful in those markets.
Thank you. I'm noticing now that we're getting the first wave of thank you for a great workshop, meaning that we are actually getting close to the workshop being over. And I know Teresa would really love it if we could sort of finish up. But so can I just do a very, very quick sort of round table here and sort of in a one-liner, how do you see the future of raw materials as supply develop? If you can do that in one line, you can get two lines if you really, really need it. But let's just do a really, really quick round table. And I'm going to start with you, Jyoti.
So I'd say that a lot of what you've just said also applies to our thinking about waste. If we can think of waste as an opportunity rather than a challenge and, something that we don't want, then I think we could do a lot to solve a lot of the problems that we've got at the moment in terms of sustainability.
Excellent. Good one. Tom?
I think sort of think about this on a systems level is vital. And also I think we need to value, as was mentioned there, value critical raw materials and give them the appropriate value. And give the mining industry perhaps values, I would say, the wrong commodities at the moment.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Neil made that point before. We need to actually understand the value of these things for real. Peter?
Yeah, I've got nothing original to say, but I will quote two people who I admire greatly. One is Michael Braungart, who, when talking about the circular economy, says we need to move away from doing the wrong things perfectly right towards doing the right things. And what we're talking about now is the right things. And then Walter Starhill, his famous saying is, the products of today are the resources of tomorrow at yesterday's prices, which I think is very wise and true.
There's some food for thought there. I think I can see everyone's kind of thinking about this, but thank you, Peter. Neil, last thoughts.
I think it is from shifting from thinking of the raw materials as a cost that's input into the business and then sort of finished at that point to an asset which is owned throughout the life cycle of the products which we need to preserve within the business. So it is down to that way that we think about and value the raw materials that we use.
Excellent. I think those were 4 great sort of take-home messages to end on. So I'm going to thank the panel very much. I thought this was a really good discussion, and I'm going to get back to Teresa, who's muted.
You're muted, Teresa.
Thank you.
Again, muted, Teresa. We are not hearing.
Okay.
Yeah, now.
So, thank you, Karen, for the great moderation. Thank you for the very fruitful and nice discussion, for all the interventions. Thank you also to the speakers from the former session. And I don't think we have a lot of time for considerations, but we really had a very vivid discussion, also on chat. I don't know, and I ask you, Harry, if we can change the information with the attendance that was put in the chat. We started by the Chinese saying about crisis being an opportunity. Really, they are, but we need to do something with the crisis, and we have to work on it that they are the opportunity. So we talked a lot about the need for a lot of innovation, a lot of research as well, to guarantee that all the decisions are transparent, based on competencies, and most of all, based on collaboration. So, we need to change our society, moving towards resources as a service. And I liked a lot the phrase, we need to use instruments to steer the market so that we can move this way. We need new regulations. So we need to convince and have the tools to convince governments for the new regulations. We need to deal with a lot of data, mapping, inventory, knowledge mapping, and also be able to deal with the complexity. These problems are systemic, so with a great deal of complexity, and we need to reduce this complexity by using new models like artificial intelligence and blockchain and other methodologies we have being studied in our universities. So I don't know, Harry, if you wanted to add something. These were some of the topics I took out from the conversations.
Thank you, Teresa, and thanks for all the presenters and the panelists today for providing a very good set of concepts and also examples of how it can work, how it can't work. I was just looking through the chat. There was active chat going on. We could not answer all the questions today for the lack of time, but we'll try to get back to you and see if some additional materials are required. We will get to you. One of the questions that is frequently asked was, do you have any case study to share about all that? Yes. Basically, we have a number of case studies which are under progress now, and we hope to have it finalized and reported in the coming months. We are planning to have the case study from UK, which Francis was mentioning, produced as a report, and there are several other case studies which will come on as reports as we have it. And my second suggestion is, if any one of you have an idea of developing a case study or a concept, please get in touch with us. We have developed a very simple format for case studies, and we will share with anyone who is interested to do a case study. And the third thing I want to mention is that we are producing 2 discussion notes, which should have been online by this time, but it was delayed due to the reviews, multiple reviews. We have a concept note on resources as a service, and we have a concept note on the critical raw materials management. Both these concept notes will be published in the coming days, and it will be available online. So please keep watch of on our website, and also most of you are in our mailing list and you will get to know about it. But if you are not in the mailing list, please get in touch with us and we will put you on the mailing list. With that, I will ask Charlotte if you have any additional comments and takeaways from this workshop today as a final thoughts from your side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry, and thank you to you, Harry, for having organised this event. Thank you for Teresa for the fantastic job chairing. Thank you to all the distinguished speakers and the excellent panel session, and to Karen for moderating the panel so well. I think there's so much rich information here, and I think we're working on the right topic, and that's the important thing, and we're responding to the needs of member states, and that's what the role of the UN is to do. So I'm not going to come up with any profound statements except to say, please stay engaged. Please do help with the case studies. Let's test the concept, because the challenges are enormous, but I think the opportunities are enormous as well if we all work collectively. So thank you all very much, and hope to see you again soon. Please remain in touch. Look at our website. There's also a session on sustainable resource management during our committee meeting next week. Not next week, the week after next. So from the 19th to the 23rd of September, Harry, you can put the link to the meeting in the chat. We've got a full week of meetings where really the focus is on trying to build resilient energy systems in the ECE region with all the inherent challenges that entails. It will be an interesting week, and on the 22nd of September, we will be having a session on sustainable resource management, and we'll be discussing further the concept of resources as a service and critical raw materials. So if you're interested, please do register. It's possible to come to Geneva in person or online. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you all very much for your participation, and looking forward to staying in touch. Thank you, everyone. And I think we can close the workshop now.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye. Have a nice day. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.